Welcome to the LawyerFair.co.uk Daily Podcast. LawyerFair helps businesses find the right lawyer at the fairest price. But on this podcast, we just chew the fat with some great guests.
Welcome again to the LawyerFair Daily Podcast. It's Andrew Weaver. I'm the CEO of LawyerFair.co.uk. I must mention quickly before I introduce the guest we have today, who I'm very, very excited about speaking to. Let me tell you, I get told off by my team for not mentioning that we are now on iTunes. So you can now subscribe and download all of the podcasts that we've been doing. And today's is number 49. I can't believe we're almost at 50 already. But I've been told to say that at the beginning rather than forget it at the end. Such is the team I have behind me. And I'm just a puppet. I'm orchestrated by others, but I am joined today by a tremendous guest calling in from Pheonix, Arizona, where I've been told it is marvelously warm and lovely. Marty Zwilling, welcome.
Well, welcome to you, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to spread the word.
Well, Marty, thank you so much. I'm not going to go into Marty's CV because, frankly, we'd be here for the entire podcast. But anybody who does follow up on this and has a look at Marty's Twitter feed and wide variety of content will see how experienced this fella is in the startup world and generally in business and writes content in entrepreneur.com, Huffington Post, HBR, amongst many. And in fact, we're going to pick up on one article that you wrote recently, Marty, about essentially startup financial projections and the credibility of those. And just before you kind of start to discuss this, it's actually really, really interesting this because the last two podcasts have been with the one, where are we now? I'm losing track of the week. The one on Tuesday, I think, was with a VC, and yesterday's was with an angel investment network. And this issue of valuations, this issue of how you get to a valuation and what you include in financial projections came up in both conversations. So it's a really interesting and pressing topic. But Marty, give me a little bit of an intro into your thoughts on the secrets to the credibility of creating financial projections.
Well, I think financial projections are really a bit of an intelligence test on the entrepreneur by investors. In other words, no investor expects you to hit them exactly, but if you have no idea or you're way off in left field somewhere, you lose credibility. And so, I'd like to start by just saying that probably one of the questions I hear a lot is from an entrepreneur: why would I even do financial projections? I've never built this business. I don't have the product yet. And so I have no idea what I'm going to do this year, much less try to project 5 years ahead. And so my answer to that is that if you have no idea where you're going, first of all, you're probably not going to get there. And secondly, don't ever expect an investor to follow you. Obviously, if you're still experimenting, you don't need financial projections for the investor because there isn't one. And so what I'm trying to do is give you some insight that investors might bring to the table, which could help you whether you need an investor or not.
And I think one of the points... Sorry, Marty, go on. I was interrupting that.
No, go ahead.
Well, it's really interesting that you start off on this because I think that the question of why the hell should I do projections, I don't know what's going to happen next month, let alone in 3 years' time, is actually missing the point, because I think the point here is about the investor is making a judgment on whether you're a rational human being, frankly, and whether your assumptions are grounded in reality.
That's right. It's all about sort of a reality check, and the reality of an investor is that they can't assess your idea. In other words, they're not as expert in your domain, hopefully, as you are, and so that's the question I always get is, what do you think of my idea? When in fact, what I might have some insight on is whether your business model makes any sense, because every idea kind of comes back to a common business, and I've had experience for years in real life as an investor looking at what companies are able to do. And as I often say, if you come up and think you're going to make $100 million of revenue in the first year, you're probably way out in left field, because no one has ever been able to do that, first of all. And secondly, it's not a rational thing in the sense that you have to build an infrastructure, you have to build buildings maybe, or you have to hire people. And so the idea that all of a sudden every person in the country is going to buy your product is not a very meaningful thing.
Absolutely. I'm going to pick up on a couple of other things that was in the article that you wrote, Marty, which I thought were really interesting. Gross margins, and being in line with industry standards. You make the very, very pertinent point that you shouldn't be going out there saying that, lower margins, but I'm going to make it up with my hard work and my grit and determination, because that ain't going to wash.
That's right. It's one of those things where I appreciate the initiative and the optimism that every entrepreneur has. But if you come into this world or come to me and say, well, I know big companies all go for 50% margins, and that's crazy. I'm going to work harder and I can live on ramen noodles. I don't need that kind of margin. Then I realize that that's very optimistic, but it's not realistic. Once you get a business which has traction, which takes off, you do need to hire people. You do need to pay benefits. You do need to pay yourself. And you only have 24 hours in a day. So you better take a lesson from the fact that most businesses that try to operate on less than 50% fail, unless you're Walmart or somebody who's been in business and has a humongous infrastructure already started. It's not likely that you're going to succeed.
And I think it's that blind optimism. It's the classic quote, isn't it? That halve your forecast and double your timeline. It really is very relevant to pretty much every business plan I suspect you've seen, and certainly most investors see.
That's right. It's everybody seems to have this myth or this optimism that my business is going to take off and be a success overnight. Seth Godin, one of the other guys who writes blogs all the time, says, I've learned that the average overnight success takes 6 years, and in fact, I think he's an optimist. Most of them take longer than that. So people who come into this for the first time often come in with some kind of tainted view of what's possible, and so what I'm trying to do in these projection guidance points is give you a little bit of reality check kind of thing.
I think that's absolutely right. I'll tell you another quote that I thought was fascinating, and I'd just like you to elaborate on. Was I think it was number 7 in your 8 secret tips, Marty, and it said, "Don't show projections with no red ink." Now, instinctively, particularly if you're not particularly experienced in promoting or doing financial projections, that may seem rather counterintuitive. But just explain a little more about what you mean by that.
Well, all I really mean is that if you are asking for an investment, you got to show that you need an investment to survive. And so if you do your projections and say, wow, I can make money, then don't ask an investor to give you $1 million. He's going to say, well, what do you want to do? Buy a new car or something with it to put it in the bank? Interest rates aren't that good. So what I recommend is that you show your projection based on no investment. And that will say, wow, if I do what I need to do the first year, I'm going to lose $800,000. And in fact, that's why I'm coming to you, Mr. Investor. I want you to give me $1 million so that it covers this red ink. And in fact, since I'm not a very good estimator, maybe I'm asking for $1 million rather than 800,000, and all that makes a lot of sense to investors as opposed to the other alternative.
Now tell me this, Marty, with your experience, what is an investor looking? What kind of return is an investor looking for? Again, I've seen in your article that you mentioned 10 times. I've heard that VCs are sometimes looking for 20 times. What is the realistic return that a startup should be projecting on behalf of an investor?
Well, I think 10 times is a good goal or a good target. The reality is that I know a lot of angel investors or VCs, and they will tell you that probably 8 or 9 out of 10 fail totally. So the reason they're asking for 10 times is not that they need 10 from everyone, but they know realistically many are going to drop out totally and they'll lose their investment. So if they get 1 out of 10, they might break even at least and or make a little bit of money if it makes 10 times as opposed to the 9 others that didn't make it. And so that's where the 10x or the 20x comes from. It's a very simple range kind of thing. It says, if I invest $1 million and I get 10% of the company for that, if it's going to sell for 100 million, I'll make 10 million. And so I've gotten 10x. That's the kind of message you want to send. You want to actually hopefully to a real company to say, my company is very similar to this company, which sold last year to Microsoft for 100 million. And so I'm projecting I'm going to do as well as they did. I'll sell for 100 million. So if you put in $1 million, you'll make 10x.
Got it. I mean, it's a very interesting space. I mean, I came into it fairly late, and I have to say the percentages of those that succeed, which is admitted certainly by most angel investors, is only the 1 or 2 in 10. So you have to be pretty optimistic and tenacious to be one of those one or 2 out of 10. So it's not a market for the faint-hearted.
It's not a market for the faint-hearted. I actually did an interview on a television show a while back. Who the announcer said, I have all these people who buy stocks, and in fact, they really keep asking me whether I should take part of my money and invest in startups. And I said, whoa, you really need to think hard about that, because the level of risk for a startup is worse than commodities. It's worse than the worst thing you can think of in stocks, because of the kind of thing we were just talking about, where 9 out of 10 might fail totally. And so I recommend that if somebody thinks they want to start investing in startups, first of all, they better take money which is disposable, so to speak, that they can afford to lose. Secondly, spread it around a little bit. I think the current model, a lot of people are suggesting the best model is what's called a portfolio model, which says you should invest in at least 10 startups. And by that, you then need to take your amount that you can invest and divide it by 10, so that you don't give it all to the first one, which may or may not be that 1 out of 10 that's going to succeed. And so there's a lot of strategy, but it's very, very risky.
I understand. I have to say, although I think crowdfunding is a wonderful and interesting innovation in fundraising, I do slightly worry that some people who are investing on the crowdfunding platforms are not aware of those stats, and I wonder where that might eventually lead into trouble. Who knows? But it's a world that if you're not deeply embedded in it, it is surprising the statistics of failure to most people.
It is surprising, and yet, a lot of people think all these rich investors are somehow making fortune. I have to tell you that, myself included, I don't know any angel investors who have made much money. There are clearly VCs who make money, and there are maybe some super angels who make money. And my assertion is that the reason they make money is that they typically don't even talk to anyone who hasn't proven themselves successful. In other words, if you have a startup CEO who sold his last company for 800 million, and he comes to you and asks for $1 million or $2 million, you say, hey, take the money. I don't need a business plan, financial projections, or anything. But if for the rest of us, or people who are talking as entrepreneurs about their first big idea, those VCs will never talk to that level of entrepreneur.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, Marty, I thank you so much for joining us, and it's been a really interesting conversation. I think you have many publications and articles that people can review. I think it's in the most recent book. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Marty, but the most recent book is Startup Pro: How to Set Up and Grow a Tech Business.
Yes, that's actually a little play on my own background. I was a programmer and developer in many roles in IBM, and so I consider myself a technologist. I love those people. I love technology, but I find they're not always good businessmen. And so any advice that I could offer, and I've learned the hard way, has some merit, I think.
Okay, well, we'll put a link with this podcast. We'll put a link to the Amazon page for that book. And listen, thank you again. I think we spoke before recording that. I think there's rain on the way to Pheonix. So I think Mrs. Zwilling is going to have an hour on the porch enjoying the rain tomorrow.
Oh, we love a little rain. And I'm sure you probably don't like it anymore, but it rains so seldom here that rain is a grand event.
You cherish every moment, I'm sure.
That's right. So I appreciate the opportunity, and feel free to contact me again. We can tackle some other subject.
Thanks, Marty. Marty Zwilling there, and that was the LawyerFair Daily Podcast. Thank you for listening. More again tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to the LawyerFair.co.uk Daily Podcast. If you'd like to listen to more, why not subscribe and download each episode via iTunes, or visit us on the LawyerFair.co.uk website.